Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Jarosz with the Summit County Progressive Democrats, here continuing our series with the interviews of the Akron mayor candidates. Today, I am joined by Malik, the councilman for Ward 8 and candidate for the Akron mayor. Thank you so much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
So the first question I have is, why are you running for mayor?
So I'm running for mayor because for my whole life and for decades before that, we've lost population here in the city of Akron. People have moved to the suburbs for safety or for better schools, and we've seen a hollowing out of our community. And it makes it harder to do even basic things like pave streets or plow streets. And we've seen the safety issues and the concerns about our schools and our housing crisis just continue to overwhelm us. And the reality is, despite a lot of good intentions and a lot of good work and some bright spots, we are managing decline. And so it's not so much that we have to grow, but that we have to actually stop the decline. And that's going to require more than just new ideas. It's going to require a different way of governing that is much more consensus-based, where we are building a comprehensive shared vision for the city's future. And so we've laid out a bold vision together for Akron, focused on safety, our schools, good jobs, and good housing. And we have more than just those good ideas, though. I also have a track record of living out my values on city council, and I'm working on getting things done, particularly focused on issue 10, where we got this charter amendment on the ballot and passed to put together this civilian review board that's going to help address basic trust issues between police and particularly our Black community. But I've done that. I've worked as a lawyer for the city. I've worked with every level of city government. But I also am not subject to thinking these same systems are our future. And so I'm willing to bring in new ideas and new perspectives. And I've pushed for that, whether it's in how we spend our ARPA money or how we address our eviction crisis. So we're putting together this bold vision for the city and trying to find a way that every one of the 190,000 residents of our city can be part of the future and get excited about our future.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I know we'll talk a little bit about issue 10 coming up. Now, one thing I wanted to just go over was you have been the city councilman in Ward 8 for the past 3 years. Is there an accomplishment you would like to highlight of your term in government service?
So I mentioned issue 10. I am proud of that. And I'm not saying that I alone did it, right? It was work that we did in consensus and in coalition with a lot of others. In the summer of 2020, George Floyd was murdered, and there were protests right outside here. And after the protests, right, after folks, had marched, then the question was, what are we going to do as a city government about it? And as a lawyer, and as a council person, I knew that the biggest issue since 2007 has been that the police auditor's office doesn't work. The guy's part-time, he has no administrative support, and there's nothing in city law that says what he can and can't access. And so since the summer of 2020, I've worked inch by inch with folks from all parts of our community to get this simple solution forward, right? A citizens review board that would oversee a strengthened auditor's office with 3 full-time staff and with specific access to information. It won't fix everything, but it is a basic first step. And yet it's taken so much work and it's faced opposition at every step. And so last November, after a terrible tragedy in the killing of Jaylen Walker, more than 62% of Akron residents voted to take this step in the face of the opposition of the mayor and other council members. And even this week, we have seen opposition to an extraordinarily qualified person who could be a member of that board, representing institutional racism in how our council functions. And so this really has been the work that I've been committed to over the past 3 years. And I've worked on so many other things. We've worked on getting people's roads paved and streets plowed and basic city services delivered to them. But there's nothing more basic than safety. And a lot of neighborhoods, folks don't feel safe. And we are not going to fix our safety issues until we bridge the gap between police and the community, and particularly the Black community. And so I have been focused on this, and it is the main thing that I'm focused on for the future.
Well, thank you. Now, what does it mean to be a progressive? And would you identify yourself as a progressive?
So I think that being a progressive means committed to building a stronger and more equitable community for everyone, right? Regardless of your race, regardless of your income, regardless of your background or experience, that everyone should have opportunity and everyone should be able to build a thriving life, right? And that comes with recognizing the obstacles and disparities that are already present in our world, right? Yeah. We don't have a race-blind world. We have a world in which there is systemic racism and there is systemic oppression on folks who make less and who have lesser economic opportunity. And so that means from the federal level on down, helping reformulate and fix those systems so that everyone can have opportunity. So yes, I would consider myself a progressive Democrat, a Warren Democrat, and I'm proud of that mantle. But I also think it's important, especially as I'm running for mayor, that I think about and talk about being the mayor for everyone, right? No matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican, no matter if you vote or not, we have 190,000 people who live in the city, and a lot of people don't feel like they are part of the city. They don't feel like the city is for them. And so I have gone to every neighborhood in our city and knocked on doors and said, no matter who you vote for, no matter whether you vote, I want to be the mayor for you. And everyone has a place in this shared vision for the city. Because I think at the end of the day, regardless of, there's so much political rhetoric, people want the same things. And we have different ways of getting there. We have different perspectives, but we all want the same things at the end of the day.
Now, with some of your conversations with members of the community, as you've been door knocking and talking with members, as a councilman and on your campaign trail, I'm sure you've heard a lot of other issues that are pressing with Akron. You've already mentioned a little bit about the safety issues. Are there any other issues you would like to highlight as to things that people have told you that they want to address? Do you have any solutions you want to share with us about some of your plans for those issues?
Yeah, so the other big issue that you hear when you knock on doors is about education in the schools. I was knocking on a door in Ward 1 off of Palisades, and this mom told me that her son is afraid to go to school. His son's, I think, a 9th grader or 10th grader at Firestone. And you can't learn if you don't feel safe in your school. You can't learn if you don't feel safe at home or in your neighborhood. And in terms of education, the city does not run our school system, right? But we did work with our school board to build these beautiful community learning centers. And what we have done, we promised that we would use them as centers for the community on evenings and weekends, and that we would connect young people to extracurriculars. And they're sorely underutilized when it comes to that, and there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape. So the city has a huge opportunity to use these as community hubs, not just for young people who should be connected to whether it's recreation or arts and all of those different things, but also for workforce. So you should be able to walk to that school, because all of them are within walking distance to our neighborhoods, and get a workforce or skills certification, right? So that's a huge opportunity. And then when it comes to education, and particularly to the behavioral challenges, we have to, as a community, have universal pre-K. Because we see when we make that investment, we get better educational outcomes, but we also address the behavioral outcomes that we're seeing with our kids. And so if we are going to create supportive learning environments, the single best thing we can do is help teach 4-year-olds in our community and start them off on a better footing.
Now, one of the other issues we wanted to address, you've brought it up already, but with the Police Oversight Board in Akron. That was a major success of the issue 10. Now, that might be the start. Do you see more steps being taken to better address police accountability in Akron, and what would those next steps be?
Absolutely. So getting the board seated is proving to be an issue, but we are going to get it done. And then that board is going to have to take the lead in figuring out where we go from there, but there are many places to start. So when we look at the killing of Jalen Walker, we know that we need to take a very close look at how we do vehicle chases and how we do traffic stops and changing those policies. But the biggest thing that we have to change is we have to move from a very reactive model of policing to a more proactive model of policing. So we have 450 officers, and 250 of those officers are patrol officers whose job is to spend their shift going from call to call to call to call to call to call. That does not give them the room or the space to build a relationship like we are doing right now,
Right.
or we have done over the years, right? But if we have 10 officers who are our community officers, who are allowed to spend their time doing foot patrols, doing other things where they don't have the obligation of rushing from call to call to call, and it allows them to approach people from a place of mutual respect and build that relationship. So how do we make sure that each of those 250 patrol officers is able to spend part of their time and sees it as a priority from the community, that the community is insisting upon to spend part of their time each month or each week building those relationships and focus more on proactive patrols. And so part of that is also freeing up some of their time by having alternative and co-responder models where mental health and social service workers are going out alongside officers so that officers are able to move along to the next call and don't have to be social workers and mental health workers themselves.
Well, thank you for that overview of that next step that we should be taking as a city. Another significant city council legislation that passed in December of 2022 was the White Pond Project.
Yep.
Now, I remember originally you were for the project, and then after some time you changed your vote to no. Would you explain kind of your stance on that issue of White Pond, maybe why you decided to vote against it?
Yep, absolutely. So when it comes to economic development and how we use particularly open green space, this has been an issue for decades in the city, but particularly a particular flashpoint while I've been on council. And a lot of the things have been in warding. So whether you talk about Riverwoods, you're talking about White Pond, you're talking about Tice Woods, right? There is this urge to build. It's easy, right? It's low-hanging fruit to, instead of redeveloping a space that's already been used, to use green space, right? And it's not that green space should under no circumstances be developed, but it does require us to be more thoughtful about the process by which we do development. So for White Pond, and for all development, what we have is a process where the city works with the developer for 6 months or a year and puts together really a finished product, and then they present it to council and to the public, and our choice is to bless the baby or to throw out the baby. Neither of those are good choices. And so in the end of May of 2022, I received the finalized White Pond proposal, and it wasn't what I would put together if I had my say, but what I did was I put out information in my Ward 8 newsletter. I shared it with folks, and I didn't hear a lot of concerns. And frankly, a lot of the concerns that I did hear were NIMBY and saying, we're worried that this will be low-income housing and people will be a threat to our safety. And I said, I don't see that. And I think there's value to having luxury housing and housing of all income types, and particularly housing that's single-story housing because we have an aging population, right? But the media landscape, and particularly the summer, people were really focused on the killing of Jalen Walker. People were not really aware of what was going on. And despite really the best efforts of putting out information, we really struggle with that. And so as people found out about it in the fall, people started reaching out and saying, we have real concerns, and concerns that in some cases I had already shared with the developers. You know, we're taking down 40 acres of trees. And I asked the developer to commit to at least giving the same amount of money that would allow the city to plant 40 acres of trees. They ended up giving us $15,000 for that, right? Which is going to equate to a couple dozen trees. Right? That's not serious, right? But those were the kinds of concerns I had, and those were the kinds of concerns that people raised. They said, you bought this land for $7 million, right? And now you want to sell it for $750,000 and give people a tax abatement, and they didn't agree with it, right? And my responsibility as a council person is to respond to the concerns of my ward, right? And so we had 200 people at a meeting at St. Sebastian, and they said, we don't feel like we're getting good enough answers, and the answers that we are getting, we don't agree with. And so my point was, I hear you, point taken. We should slow down, and we should listen, and we should reevaluate. And we should have that 200-person meeting at St. Sebastian at the beginning of the process and not the end of the process. And as one council person, I don't control the process. As mayor, I would have more input over that process and when we get input. And so at that point, after that meeting, the administration and the mayor decided to charge forward and say, we're doing it regardless of these concerns. And so at that point, I could not support it, because that's not a way that we should treat people. That's not treating people with dignity and respect. It's not building a shared vision, because now all those 200 people, they raised their hand, they said, we had a concern, and they were told, it doesn't matter. It's a done deal. Those aren't real concerns. And regardless of whether some of those concerns are more valid than others, because some of those concerns are more valid than others, that's not a way you should treat people. And that's why we see people leaving. Why Mokai Okolo is not being allowed on the Civilian Review Board is why we see people leaving. We have to build a city government that has values that make people want to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much for
I'm
that
fired
take.
up.
Oh, I appreciate the energy and the enthusiasm, the drive. Now, what is the best way for people to either contribute to your campaign, get involved as a volunteer, or even just get more information about you?
MalikForAkron.com, right? They can reach out to me. We are doing events all across the city. People can sign up to get information. They can follow us on social media. It's not hard at all to donate to our campaign, but appreciate however people can help out. We're spending the focus of the next 2 months knocking on doors and having conversations with folks. And so, however someone wants to engage, if you want to knock on doors, if you want to make phone calls, if you want to donate, if you want to talk to a friend or neighbor, if you want to host an event in your house with 5 people, however people want to engage, we are trying to model through this campaign how we would govern.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. So again, we have Councilman Shamus Malik, candidate for the Akron mayor race. Thank you for watching.
Thanks, Nate.